Hey, y'all, heard the news by now. On Thursday evening, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals issued a ruling upholding Tennessee's ban on gender reassignment surgeries on minors here in the state of Tennessee. And actually, the appellate court combined two cases. There was a similar law in Kentucky that was up before the court. And so the court has upheld the ban on these procedures in both Tennessee and Kentucky. So look, first let me just say right off the bat that this is good news, clearly. We supported the bill and wanted the bill to pass and advocated for the bill. We asked you to advocate for the bill that would protect children in the state of Tennessee and keep these surgeries from happening on minors. All that said, however, there are some concerning things that you should know in this ruling, and we want to point a couple of those things out to you. And why is that important? Because, in my estimation, the ruling as stated easily has the potential to reopen the doors in the future to relitigate this issue and possibly strike down this law based on FDA approval. And I'll get to that in just a minute, which is a scary prospect. Do any of you trust the FDA? I know I don't. But unfortunately, this entire ruling seems to hang in the balance based on whether or not the FDA feels like these transition surgeries are appropriate for minors. But let's set that aside for a minute and talk about the good part of the ruling. The court did a phenomenal job of upholding states' rights. Quite honestly, when you look at the ruling in its totality, it's a lot less about transgenderism and surgeries or puberty blockers being used in the case of gender-affirming care, as they call it, on minors, in so much as it's about states' rights. And so here in this ruling, the court clearly upheld a state legislature duly elected by the people of the state and upheld their right to pass and enact law without not giving jurisdiction to the federal government, without federal judges overstepping their authority and basically sticking their noses into business that it doesn't belong. So just want to take you to this little spot here, and we'll read this about in terms of states' rights. And they have this to say in the ruling: constitutionalizing new areas of American life is not something federal courts should do lightly, particularly when the states are currently engaged in serious, thoughtful debates about the issue. By our count, 19 states have laws similar to those in Tennessee and Kentucky, all of recent vintage. Sound government usually benefits from more rather than less debate, more rather than less input, and more rather than less consideration of fair-minded policy approaches. And I'll close with this statement here. When the Constitution is neutral about an issue, legislatures have considerable discretion to regulate the matter. In that setting, the key premise of a democracy prevails, that the people's electoral representatives will identify the strengths and weaknesses of any policy and presumptively be allowed to enact it, the antidote for mistakes being the passage of time and the good sense and self-interest of election-tenured public officials to fix them. So, look, right away, the great thing about this ruling, if I can get my mouse to work here, the great thing about this ruling is that the court is being verbose in protecting the rights of state legislators to enact laws without fearing federal overreach, especially from the judiciary. That's a great thing. I mean, that is something worth celebrating here. Why is that? Because in the court's view, this is much more than the issue of transgenderism. Okay, this is much more than the issue of even protecting children. Would you agree with me that there are more issues that Tennessee is going to have to deal with that other states may allow that that we don't want to allow here in our state for a variety of reasons. In this particular case, just so happens to be in the vein of protecting children. So the making this a states' rights issue is a huge deal because it broadens our ability to enact and pass law here in the state of Tennessee, regardless about how anyone else feels about it, which is appropriate because we elect our state representatives to duly enact laws that we, the people, ask for our society to live in and defend our liberty here in our own state. All right, so that's good. But let's talk about a couple of things that are not so great. One of the issues you'll find with this ruling from the Sixth Circuit is the issue of parental rights. And so I want to read a couple of these statements to you. And they say this: state governments have an abiding interest in protecting the integrity and ethics of the medical profession and preserving and promoting the welfare of the child, which we agree with. These interests give states broad power, even broad power. Now, here's the tricky part. These interests give states broad power, even broad power, to limit parental freedom when it comes to medical treatment. I'm going to go down to another statement down here to finish this thought. The key problem is that the claimants overstate their parental right by climbing up the ladder of generality to a perch in which parents control all drug and medical treatments for their children that the case law and our traditions simply do not support. This statement by the court is concerning in terms of parental rights and the right of a parent to direct the medical care of their child. And look, we knew going into this that was going to be dangerous territory. And it's really unfortunate that a statement like this is made in this ruling, but it needed to be addressed because this was one of the defenses of the parents that sued the state in order to transition their child. And their argument was, look, I'm the parent. I have the right to make medical decisions for my own child. Who are you to tell me that I can't allow my child to reassign their gender, right? So that was one of the arguments. Of course, that's a foolish argument, and the fact of the matter is the state has an interest in protecting children from abuse, right? And protecting the welfare of children. The problem with the statement the court made is they sort of honed that in to the state being able to mandate medical care for children regardless of the wishes of the parent to some degree. They even go a little bit further down in the ruling and bring out statements from the 1905 Jacobson v. Massachusetts case, which we talked about a lot in 2020 and 2021 with all of the mandates, because that was a case that apparently gave state legislators the right to mandate vaccines in the case of a public health emergency, which, of course, we vehemently disagree with. But the Sixth Circuit, in this opinion, is using that kind of language and drawing from the Jacobson case in so much as to say that states do have so much of an interest in the welfare of a child that they are able to limit parental freedom, right? And the parent's choice to make medical care or medical decisions for their child's medical care. It would have been much better to hear the court say, boys are boys and girls are girls, right? And we're made in the image of God. And parents do not have a natural right nor a legal right to reassign their child's gender or their sex by surgery or the use of puberty blockers or any other medical alternatives. That would have been a much better statement and foundational basis, meaning that the state has an interest in protecting a child from abuse. But that's not what they said here. They said the state has the ability to limit a parent's freedom to make medical decisions for their child. I would just submit to you that statement is a bit concerning. And if the tables were turned, if you look at the other side of the coin, if we're fighting for medical freedom and against state mandates or whatever the case may be, those kinds of statements do not necessarily bode well for that argument. But let's go on to one other issue. I want to look at statements made regarding the FDA. So let's take a look at that. For me personally, this is the biggest concern that I want to bring up. And unfortunately, as you read through the court opinion, this is really what they've hung their hat on. So beyond states' rights, which we appreciate, the problem is that the court predicated those states' rights simply on the fact that the FDA has not spoken to approve these procedures for transgender care. So let me read what they state here. Neither the doctors, adults, nor their children have a constitutional right to use a drug that the FDA deems unsafe or ineffective. A little bit of a concerning statement there, but that was concerning another case and other issues at the time that they were addressing. But they go on to say, that is true even if the FDA bars access to an experimental drug that a doctor believes might save a terminally ill patient's life. This was a case about someone having access to an experimental drug that was not approved by the FDA to use for their particular condition, but even this individual's doctors thought that there might be a chance that it may save their life. They were terminally ill. And of course, the state regulations would not allow the doctors to treat this patient with this particular drug, even though they were dying. It was considered an experimental treatment for this particular illness. And so they sued, and the Supreme Court actually upheld the states or the medical profession's need to deny treatment, saying that an individual does not have a constitutional right to access medication, even in the case of death, if the FDA has not approved the drug for that purpose, right? So that's, in terms of medical freedom, that's a really challenging position in terms of individual liberty, right? Which sort of plays into this issue a little bit, because you have a medical physician, a medical professional, and a patient willing to take the drug, a doctor saying that this drug may work for you or you might die, yet the medical regulatory authority, including the FDA, is unwilling to allow that treatment to proceed, and the court upholds that decision. That's challenging. That's not a good position to be in for medical freedom. And so the court here in this case is using that language and using that example and continuing that conversation here. Let's go continue reading. In making these decisions, the Constitution rarely has a say over the FDA's work. Gender transitioning procedures often employ FDA-approved drugs for non-approved off-label uses. Kentucky and Tennessee decided that such off-label use in this area presents unacceptable dangers. Many medical professionals and many medical organizations may disagree, but the Constitution does not require these two states to view these treatments in the same way as the majority of experts, or to allow drugs for all uses simply because the FDA approved them for others. It is difficult to maintain that the medical community is of one mind about the issue of these hormones for gender dysphoria when the FDA is not prepared to put its credibility and testing protocols behind the use. What is new, evolving, and conflicting often prompts change and eventually leads to different best practices, something the Constitution facilitates rather than handcuffs. And so I think for all of us, it's really important to understand what's being said here, because unfortunately, what you're going to hear from most people in Tennessee is just a big celebration. We did it. We won. And I'll acknowledge and I agree, for right now we did, and it's a good win, and we're protecting kids, and that's great. But what you need to understand is that we are on a fault line. We are on the fence post. We are on very, let's see, how did Jesus put it? You know, we are on a foundation of sand, and we are not on the rock of the Constitution. And this is a problem. The court, I'll close with this. The court in allowing, it's an important phraseology, the court is allowing the states to enact their sovereign states' rights per the 10th Amendment to protect children. In this particular instance, only because the FDA has yet to how they say, lend its credibility. The FDA has not approved surgery or puberty blockers for the use of, or the legitimate use, I should say, of gender-affirming care. Again, I'm using their language here. I hate that language, but it's what they say. And simply because the FDA has not yet lended its credibility or approved those methods for treatment, the court is now deferring to the states. What can you infer from that statement? Do you think it's possible, and I'm just going to pose a question here. Again, we're dealing with Fauci's FDA, right? We're dealing with an FDA that unconstitutionally and I believe unlawfully issued an emergency use authorization for a shot that has caused death across the country and maimed many people, now which many believe are dangerous. That's a consensus that has grown like wildfire over the last 2 years. The FDA, though, has not stopped. They've continued to approve these boosters, even for children as young as 6 months old. And the CDC went so far as to now recommend these shots to be included on the child immunization schedule. So you got to understand, that's what we're dealing with. That's the kind of FDA we're dealing with. So let me ask you a question. Do you think it's plausible? Is it reasonable to assume that in the very near future, the FDA may very well approve, they may, as the court says, lend their credibility and approve the use of puberty blockers and surgery for gender-affirming care, including enacting that care or enabling that care for minors? Do you think there's a possibility that may happen? All right. If you're like me, you believe the answer is emphatically yes. So let me make sure you understand what the Sixth Circuit is saying. What the Sixth Circuit is letting us know is upon the day that the FDA does approve the use of puberty blockers and surgeries to treat minors, everything's back up for grabs. Because their decision is not based, see, they have divorced, and this is our problem. And it's my problem with the courts, and it's our problem that we're going to have continually when we run to the court and when we pass these types of laws. A law that was not based on natural law, and a court decision, therefore, that's not based on natural law. Because nowhere in this court decision is it being said, again, as I stated earlier, that we're made in the image of God. That there's just a truth that we all abide by. There are boys and there are girls. And because a state has an interest in the ability to protect children from abuse, even from their parents, and I agree with that. But it's not that we're limiting a parental right to direct the medical care of their child, which is what the court, unfortunately, is saying. What we're saying is we should have a duty to protect a child, to protect the child's freedom and their liberty to be free from abuse, even at the hands of their parent, regardless as to whether or not that abuse is in the form of medical treatment or any other type of abuse that the law prevents currently today. Keeping children from abuse is a thing, and that has nothing to do with medical care. But that's not what the court is saying. The court is limiting parental freedom, and it's giving deference to the FDA. So I just want to submit to you, as you're hearing all the news and everyone is celebrating and applauding that we've banned these surgeries in Tennessee, which for now is a good thing. I agree. But understand that the day the federal government disagrees with that assessment and the FDA approves these treatments, we're back to square one. And unfortunately, we're dealing with a court that has so far opined that it believes that the FDA and its ability to regulate medical care is superior to the Constitution. It's basically what they've said here. The Constitution is a document in the court's view that is evolving with culturally accepted norms. and whenever it becomes more culturally acceptable for parents to allow their 14-year-old or their 9-year-old boy to become a girl, then the Constitution is going to protect that, especially, right, whenever the FDA says it's okay. That's where we are. That's exactly what this court decision is saying. So where does that leave us here in Tennessee? We have to be ever vigilant and ever mindful. We have to continue, whenever this case arises again, whenever the FDA makes its move, to petition our legislators, not just to pass law. This is where the brave part comes in, right? This is where you need men and women in the legislature with the stones and the backbone to stand up against a federal government, even against a Supreme Court if necessary, to stand on principle and do the right thing, and stand on what we know to be the truth of God's word, regardless of what the FDA has to say about it. That's it for